Hi, my name is April Lynn Gibble Downey, and I'm author of Images of America, Manheim. I grew up in Mannheim, and my family goes back to the area about 300 years, when most of my ancestors came from southwestern Germany and northern Switzerland. They were part of a major influx of immigrants who spoke mostly German, and they're now called the Pennsylvania Dutch. I'm so excited to show you around my hometown. Let's get started.
Manheim is a charming little town nestled in the countryside along Chickies Creek in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Manheim was founded by an eccentric German glassmaker named Henry William Stiegel in 1762. This town was born of entrepreneurship and the hardy, adventuresome spirit of early America. It is home to numerous historical buildings, the world's largest auto auction, a proud community, and unique businesses pleasing to the eye and the palate. Today, we will be exploring the history of this beautiful town and its historical treasures. The founder of Manheim, Henry William Stiegel, was a Lutheran immigrant from Germany. He came across the Atlantic on a ship named Nancy in 1750. His German name was pronounced Heinrich Wilhelm Stiegel. Lured into the bountiful prospects of the Pennsylvania countryside, he made his way to Elizabeth Furnace, in a settlement that was to become the town of Lidditz. There, Stiegel became an ironmaster and his ambition soared. Not satisfied with ironworking, he set out to produce glassworks and became not only the first, but also one of the greatest glass manufacturers in early American history.
Stiegel's glass factory once stood in this location behind me. You'd never know it today, but here was once a grand glass factory, said to be big enough for a 6-horse carriage to enter and turn around inside of.
Although we do not have a photograph or drawing of Stiegel's glass factory, this sketch, created by Bill McComsey, is based on historical records and other known glass factories. But his ambition was not only for manufacturing. He set out to build a new American town from scratch. In 1762, he partnered with Charles and Alexander Stedman to purchase the land that would become Manheim, and together they plotted out its streets and the center square. It was a town which was to become a hub of industry and commerce for the surrounding countryside. Stiegel's extravagant lifestyle and grandiose flair matched his ambition. He was known for his overly elaborate dress and behavior and even called himself a baron. Here on the corner of the town square, he built for himself an impressive Georgian-style mansion 2.5 stories high. On the roof of his home, he built a widow's walk on which a band would play music, heralding Stiegel to and from his mansion.
Henry William Stiegel lived in this mansion on the square for about 10 years, until 1775, when his debts became unmanageable and he came to financial ruin. After a few days in debtor's prison, he was released without a home and no penny to his name. Between 1777 and 1778, Robert Morris, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence and a major financier of the Revolutionary War, stayed in this house.
Today, only small remnants of the original building remain, as it was mostly torn down and covered over with this Italianate-style building in the 19th century by the Arndt family. That is why this building is often called the Arndt Building. In the second half of the 19th century, suppers, theater performances, and dances were held here for the community.
But bricks are not the only things said to remain here. Over the years, numerous businesses have come and gone from this building, and along with them, reports of paranormal experiences within these walls. Could Baron Stiegel still visit his beloved stately home? Does he lament that music no longer fills the air with his coming and going?
I am Deborah Winchell, or AKA Miss Cricket, for Cricket School for the Performing Arts.
Awesome. And how long have you been in the studio?
Since 2000, but I came here in 1988 was the first time I was in the building.
Awesome. And I heard that there are some ghost stories that come along with being here. Would you like to share one or two of them?
Sure. I like the one that John used to always tell about when he was in what is now our waiting area was his office, that he and another girl were at the end of their night, stopped class, and they were just having a little conversation, and they heard whistling, and I can't think of her name right now, but he would tell her to stop, and she's like, that's not me. And they'd look around, and so they both looked at each other, and they weren't saying anything, and they both heard it, and that kind of freaked them out. My other story, I have the door, I haven't replaced the door yet, was the one with the hole in it, and for some reason that door never shut right, so we have one of those little hook latches on it now, but since it always swung open, we were sitting there again one night. Of course, it could be wind, could be anything, but even if you pushed it against the door jamb, it would never stay shut. And one night it just decided to close, and nobody was on the other side of the door, nobody was in the room. We always say, that's Baron, making his presence known.
One thing we just experienced when I was setting up the camera was the light up at the ceiling was off, and then it just randomly turned on.
That's Baron, say hello. He likes what we're doing because it's all about him. Another night, we were in the other room. We just moved back into this building, and of course, dancers, we always do our fun things around Halloween. At the time, I decorated a lot more than I do, and I put black and orange streamers in that doorway. And of course, streamers, of course, with any kind of movement, they're going to flow. And we did our candlelight dancing and just played some creepy music just because it's Halloween. And turned off the lights, and the girls started screaming. Turned the lights back on, and everybody's chill. Little Macy is like scared. It's like a standstill. And the streamers, all of them were like flowing, except for the one in the very middle was just kind of like twisting, really, really slow. And I said, "That's Baron."
Awesome. That's a great story.
Very weird story. I was like, okay, so one of these days we're gonna okay, if you're here, Baron, write your name on the mirror, tell us hello with, leave a lipstick out.
Oh, I want to be there for that.
Wouldn't that be awesome? Just to...
That would be fabulous. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
So this is the studio I used to twirl in when it was the Phoenix Twirling Group. It was directed by John Bunneman Jr. And it was one of the first places in my life that I felt like it was home outside of my home. I had so many fond memories here. And the one time we were twirling, and in the middle of the routine, one of the girls kind of shrieked and said she saw a man right outside that window. But that window is 3 stories up.
Before leaving, Miss Cricket invited me to look around the stairs that lead up to the roof, and there we found some interesting writing on the wall. A visual record of part of the building's long, long history.
In honor of Mannheim's founder, the local school sports teams have chosen the Barons as their name, so that to this day, Stiegel is a part of the local festivities and community events. On East High Street, not far from Stiegel's mansion, are two historical treasures, owned and cared for by the Manheim Historical Society. They are the Keith and Fassick houses, two log cabins built around the town's very beginning in the 1700s.
This is the Keith House. It is an early colonial German log cabin. This German-American vernacular house is sometimes called a Fürkuchenhaus. It was originally built in the 1700s on the corner of Main Street and Colebrook Street. It was moved here in the 1990s alongside High Street, where it is preserved by the Manheim Historical Society. Records for this cabin go back to 1773 when Henry William Stiegel sold it to Henry Hunts.
Now this house is really cool because the construction is all original. So now the interior is not all original because, like I said, people remodeled and people lived in this house. This house got moved in 1992, I think it was. And they had ripped out the fireplace and put in a bathroom, and so when the Historical Society got it, they put it back to the way it was before. This house is built on what's called the Continental Plan, just like the Hans-Herr house, which is the oldest house in Lancaster County. It's pretty much was the go-to for the early Germans as to how they built their houses here. The kitchen is the width of one end. The rest of it is divided into two rooms. Over the years, most of them were little houses. The Hans-Herr house is a big stone house, but this is more typical of what you would have seen around in towns and stuff, a little house. So mostly they got ripped down and new houses, bigger houses got built. So there are hardly any of them left in Lancaster County anymore. This is the Kugler kitchen. Like I said, it's the width of one end of the building. We have our nice fireplace here with a crane, and chains so that you could hang a pot or whatever to cook. We also they use what's called a trivet or a spider. That's that thing there that you could put in coals and set a pot on to cook. There was also a rye straw basket over in the other house. Here's another one. Rye straw was a material that was used only by the Pennsylvania Germans. A lot of the people up and down the coast and stuff made coil baskets like this, but they made them out of materials that they had, like sweetgrass in the Carolinas, that type of thing. The Germans were the only ones that used rye straw. And rye has rot and disease and pest-resistant qualities. So it was really good for storing food, which was always a concern for them because over the winter you couldn't grow anything, so you had to store. They had big long tables, often plank tables, for workspace. They were a bread box. This is a very old jelly cupboard that was donated to us. It's very cool. This one over here is a reproduction, but I also like it. And typical materials for plates, wood, carving wood bowls or whatever, redware, which is what this is. Possibly they may have brought something from the old country when they came with them, but most often got broken transit anyway. So mostly it was, redware or wood were the main things they made bowls out of. And forks didn't really come into being used at the table till the late 1800s. Before that, it was just something that you used for cooking. You cut your meat and stab it with a knife and eat it like that. So then the rest of the house was divided into the sala and the Schlafkammer, which was the living area and the bedroom. the fireplace was the main source of heat. They may have had what was called a 6-plate stove, just made out of 6 plates of metal, a parlor stove for heat in here. And it would have gone up in there. There would have been a hole to put the pipe in to go smoke the same chimney as the main fireplace. They had big families, so in the winter you closed the shutters and people crammed in here, and the body heat helped keep it warm. I also asked people, why do you think the ceilings are so low? And they almost invariably say because people were shorter. Well, generally that's true. With better nutrition, people have grown tall, but George Washington was 6 foot tall. There were tall people back then. It's because to keep the heat down, you make a high ceiling, all the heat wants to go up. And the smaller the area, the less wood you have to chop to heat it for the winter. So that was why the ceilings were low. The bedroom, these are the Keiths who lived in the house. Late 1800s, very early 1900s. He was a blacksmith. And when this house stood up at the corner of Colebrook and Maine, he had a blacksmith shop beside it that he worked out of. Mom and Dad and baby would have slept in this. They may have had a trundle bed that pulled out from underneath the bed for the toddler. Mm-hmm. When the next baby was born, the kid in the trundle bed got kicked upstairs as a loft, and that's where the kids slept. Usually a pallet on the floor, and you pile all together and put the covers on because there's no heat up there. And it's just a little bit the chimney gives. And since the houses were not at all insulated, it wasn't unusual to wake up in the morning on a cold, windy night with snow on your quilt. I mean, it was below freezing up there. So everybody piled. Nobody wanted to get out of bed in the morning in the winter. I'll be the first one.
I bet.
That's an indenture on the wall from Stiegel's days. Yeah, we want to eventually get this colonial, and we're working towards it, but the table and chairs and bench and stuff are not colonial. So, I mean, we have to deal with what we have for now. Being a nonprofit, we don't have unlimited funds. We put chicken blood or pig blood or something like that in it to get the red color. Yeah, it's called blood paint.
This is the Fossick House. Similar to the Keith House, it is also a 1700s log cabin. It was originally constructed on South Charlotte Street, but then later was dismantled and brought here along High Street, where it is now preserved by the Manheim Historical Society.
There were very few pre-colonial glass makers, Stiegel being one of the few. It was brought from England, so it was very expensive. Mm-hmm. So if you had a house full of glass, you were well off. Yeah. And this house, I'm not even positive whether, people remodeled over the years. It is possible that some of these windows were put in later, and they're not original.
So you said originally the windows wouldn't have had glass in them?
No, they would have had oiled paper or oiled hides. And then in the winter, you close the shutters. Yeah. Because glass was very expensive. Most of it was brought from England. There weren't very many colonial glass makers, really just a couple. Okay, in the early days before photography was a thing, we didn't do picture books that we exchanged with our friends. We did hair books. And this one was made in 1855. And in it, you took your friend's hair, you braided it or they braided it, and then you sewed it into the book with their name and the date. So that's what that is. Racks to hang things on. The early houses did not have closets, so you either hung your clothing on the wall or kept them in a chest. We have an old jelly cupboard here that has some relics from the glass works and some early cookware. This table is really cool. I'll take everything off to show you, but if you want to pull that chair, pull the peg on your left hand with your left hand on the left hand side. Just the left hand.
Oh, this just come out?
And it becomes a bench.
Oh, wow.
Pull the right one, it does the same thing, only the other direction.
Huh.
In addition to the Keith and Fastic houses, it is thought that there are several other 18th century log cabins throughout Manheim, lying quietly beneath modern facades and siding. Right from the very beginning, Henry William Stiegel had planned this plot to be the home of a Lutheran church for the residents of Manheim. In his memos, he noted that Lot 220 on the southeast corner of High and Wolf Streets was to be a church lot for the community at no price. Stiegel was a very religious man and was active in the church as a host for meetings, an occasional preacher, and as a musician. In 1772, the land was officially deeded to the Lutheran congregation, which Henry Melchior Muhlenberg, who was known as the father of American Lutheranism, helped establish inside of Stiegel's mansion. On this patch of land, the Zion Lutheran Church was erected, but what we see here today is the third incarnation of the church.
The original Zion Lutheran Church was a wooden building built in 1770 on the opposite side of the lot alongside Wolf Street. Baron Stiegel had given this lot to the Lutheran congregation for a price of only 5 shillings and the rent of a yearly rose to be given to Stiegel every year in June. The giving of a red rose may seem overly sentimental to us today, but back then, both in Europe and the New World, it was not an uncommon arrangement. However, it is believed that payment was abandoned almost immediately.
In 1857, a new Zion church made of brick replaced the original wooden church. However, this new building was quickly outgrown by the community and needed to be replaced just 34 years later.
By the time that the third Zion Lutheran Church was being planned, the cemetery had already been in use for over 100 years. In order to build a church large enough for the congregation, it had to be moved to the opposite corner alongside Hay Alley, which is where I'm standing today. Only today, it is called Hazel Street.
The current Zion Lutheran Church was built in 1891 and was built in the Gothic style. It features a high tower, sandstone lintels, a corbelled brick cornice, and Gothic arch stained glass windows on the first floor with round stained glass windows above. A year later, in 1892, Dr. J.H. Sealing, a local doctor and historian, pioneered the annual Festival of the Red Rose, a memorial to be held once a year during which the church would give a single red rose to one of Stiegel's descendants. This celebration still continues to this day. The Zion Lutheran Church's cemetery has some beautiful examples of traditional Pennsylvania Dutch tombstone motifs. Among some of the most common symbols is the hourglass, representing the passing of time, and flowers, which are very common in Pennsylvania Dutch artwork.
So could you tell me a little bit more about the rose window?
Yes, when the church was in the process of being built in 1891, the congregation had ordered a rose window to be placed in the chancel. When the first stained glass window came in, it was a blue rose instead of a red rose. So unfortunately, it was sent back, and then a window with the red rose had arrived and was placed in the chancel.
Oh, interesting. Thank you.
When the railroad came, filling the town with a steady source of travelers, accommodations for guests needed to be added. In 1869, J.S. Henry built this large hotel right across the street from the railroad. He called it the American House Railroad Hotel, and it was built in the Italianate style popular at that time. In addition to the guest rooms, the hotel featured a bar room, dining room, and parlors, and had its own water spring in the basement. In 1906, a telephone line was added.
At 152 years old, this building still provides meals and comfort for visitors today, but it was not a continuous service. In the 1900s, the American House got in trouble with the law for installing gambling machines, throwing parties, and liquor violations. In 1950, the American House received its most surprising visitor to date, a 1,600-pound bull which somehow escaped a local slaughterhouse and entered the restaurant. The patrons had to work together to chase the bull outside. After falling into disrepair, the American House finally got a remodel in 1986. It opened the following year as the Cat's Meow, a roaring 20s-themed restaurant which still delights locals and visitors alike.
Nothing is as quintessentially iconic as a small town's main street and center square. This is also true of Manheim, whose square boasts of some truly beautiful and historical architecture. The square sits on High Street, which runs approximately east and west through town. On the one end of the square is Charlotte Street, and on the other end, in front of Stiegel's mansion, is Main Street, which used to be named Prussian Street. Prussian Street was named after Prussia, the German states that were unified by King Frederick the Great. It was a fitting name for Stiegel, a German immigrant, to have picked for one of the most important streets in town. However, after World War I, the borough changed its name from Prussian Street to Main Street due to the conflict America had with Germany.
When the town square was originally designed, it was a big open field in which houses and businesses sprung up around. The open area was used not only for traffic, but also celebrations and children's baseball. Today, Market Square is still a hub of traffic and commerce today. Across the street from Stiegel's mansion, right in front of the library, is a pretty little park, perfect for sitting and enjoying a good book. However, this area was not always a little park.
Here was once the gorgeous residence of Abraham Klein, a businessman in Manheim and who served as a burgess in 1873. In 1910, the home was razed and replaced by the beautiful Faith Independent Church, with large, arch-stained glass windows. This church was eventually run by the Salem United Evangelical Congregation. In the 1980s, this church was also removed to make way for the little park we see today. Along Main Street in front of the park is the 136-year-old town clock, first brought to Manheim in 1926 by the Flinchball Jewelry Store, and was acquired by the Manheim Historical Society in 1994. In 1798, on the corner of Prussian Street in the square, Samuel Ensminger started his apothecary business here. For over 100 years, this was the home and place of businesses for several owners. The Keystone National Bank was established in 1887 with Aaron H. Danner, J.B. Schenck, and J.B. Diem serving as presidents. Around 1894, the bank built a relatively small yet stately bank building on the square, besides the Ensminger residence. However, in 1925, Keystone National Bank bought the corner property and raised the brick structure to make room for a new, grandiose gray stone bank building. This 1925 building was built with Beaux Art influence, an architectural style which blended French neoclassicism with Gothic and Renaissance aesthetics. The historic Mannheim Preservation Foundation was started by Elizabeth Kiefer. Her and her husband Miles Kiefer's love for Mannheim's history resulted in a terrific collection of artifacts on display here, as well as a library and archive. The foundation also has a garden dedicated to Elizabeth and a carriage house in the back that can be used by the community as rental space. The foundation also produces a newsletter called Our Heritage, which highlights stories about the town's history. Here on the corner of High Street and South Charlotte Street is a large Italianate brick building built in the early 1900s and was originally called the Washington House Hotel. But this building is the hotel's second incarnation, as an earlier wood-frame Washington House stood at this location. We know that this tavern was once smaller and was owned by Jacob Meyer in 1817, but the Pennsylvania Historical Resource Survey states that it is possible the tavern existed here since before 1800. It was enlarged in 1871 and then replaced in the early 1900s with the current building we see today.
One of the coolest things that I love about Manheim is how much of the old architecture remains. However, behind me is an example of extreme change. Here on the corner of the square used to be Stiegel's office. It was a small, humble brick building built in 1765.
Here is where Stiegel would have sat and planned out his many business ventures and written in his logs. However, in 1910, his small brick office was torn down to make way for this grand Georgian revival home. It is 2.5 stories with a hip pyramidal roof and fluted columns and was built by Clayton Gibble, a Mannheim clothier and cigar manufacturer. After the Civil War, cigar manufacturing flourished in Mannheim, as several cigar factories found their home among the town streets. The first Trinity Evangelical Congregational Church in Manheim began in 1835 on the corner of North Charlotte and West Granby Streets. However, in 1883, this beautiful Romanesque revival church was built for the congregation on the square.
The Danner building behind me is not only one of the largest in the square, but it's also extremely important for Mannheim's history. George H. Danner built a store here in 1862, and in 1882, the original wooden building was replaced with this 3-story brick building.
George H. Danner was not only a businessman who provided a large store for the center of town, but he was also deeply interested in local history, and he collected many artifacts and antiques. In his new building, he displayed his collection on the 3rd floor, which he opened up to the public as a museum once a week.
Today, Danner's collection is stored at the Hershey Story Museum in Hershey, Pennsylvania. The museum kindly allowed me to come into their storeroom to photograph some of the artifacts.
This is the location of one of the oldest national banks in Lancaster County. Established in 1865 in the original brick building that was here, it then moved to South Prussian Street. This bank later returned to this location, and in 1924, it replaced the original building with this neoclassical edifice we see today. Neoclassical architecture sought to bring back the majestic yet simple architecture of the ancient Greeks and Romans, and we can see this example was a success. The April 12th, 1912 edition of the Manheim Sentinel exclaimed enthusiastically, "And now, one and all, get in line and mark time for as sure as shootin'. If you do not and are in the way, the steamroller of this Mannheim forward movement will roll over you and make you feel as flat as one of Mother Good's old pancakes." Old Home Week was a busy time full of parades and events. The whole town was decorated with flags and lights, and a midway was set up on East Ferdinand Street, full of entertainment for all. The whole town celebrated its long history and community. In 1962, Manheim celebrated its bicentennial, where once again, the entire town showed up in full spectacle to celebrate. Going north on Route 72, the area of Manheim spreads out throughout several miles of farmland. Near the border of Lebanon County lies the Mount Hope Estate and Winery and the Pennsylvania Renaissance Fair. Land in this area was purchased by Peter Grubb in 1779. In 1784, Peter Grubb opened an iron furnace here, which was later turned into a hot blast furnace by his son during the Industrial Revolution.
Henry Bates Grubb built the original mansion here between 1800 and 1805 in the Federal period style. In the late 1800s, the Grubb family enlarged and remodeled the mansion to include a combination of Federal and Victorian architecture.
In 1980, Chuck Ramito opened a winery on the estate. Ramito hosted a Maryland jousting club here to encourage visitors to his winery. The popularity of this event soared and eventually grew into what is now the Pennsylvania Renaissance Fair. The fair brings in over 200,000 visitors per year who are dazzled and delighted with Renaissance-flavored shows, games, shops, and food.
Cheers.
The Harry B. Shearer Heritage Center on South Grant Street is home to the Manheim Historical Society, which was founded in 1964. They are a genuine treasure for the community of Manheim. The Heritage Center contains artifacts on display, thousands of photographs, a library of local history, and archives of newspapers, deeds, and maps. Additionally, the Historical Society owns and preserves historical sites around town, and they organize community events.
I'm Suzanne Riley. I'm the president of the board of directors for the Manheim Chamber of Commerce. And welcome to Manheim. We love our small town. And just the recent revitalization that's happened, it seems recent or overnight to a lot of people, but it's been a dedicated group of entrepreneurs, business owners, property owners who really want to see the town continue to move forward. A lot has been bringing new businesses into the central business district, and we have so many crafts people, makers, artists. It's really becoming an artist haven, which is very neat. And we have this historic square called Market Square, where it's a divided square. I forget there's an architectural term for it, but it's absolutely gorgeous. It kind of reminds you of a Norman Rockwell scene. And around the square, there had been many residences and professional offices, but recently, by basically one property at a time, more pedestrian-driven businesses are coming in. And it's been a concerted effort between the Chamber of Commerce, the Manheim Borough Municipality, the commercial property owners, and concerned citizens who really went out and targeted the types of businesses that help turn a small downtown around.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Manheim has the distinction of being a town founded before the Revolutionary War, and which has not only survived, but has also flourished up until today. Many members of its community and businesses are proud of the deep history which covers the streets of this beautiful little town. Buildings from the 17 and 1800s whisper memories of the past, while family names from the town's beginnings remain staples in the community. Always a center for commerce, Manheim became headquarters for the world's largest auto auction, and yet is also home to many unique startup businesses. From its grand historic buildings to humble farmhouses, Manheim is a community filled of historic charm and countryside grace.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through my hometown of Manheim, Pennsylvania. Please remember to support your local historical societies and historians. For it is through history that we learn a sense of community and continuity, and we also learn what truly makes America America. Please join us on our next adventure in America's historic towns.